Maine People Podcast, available everywhere. Click subscribe so you never miss an episode. Welcome to the Maine People Podcast. I'm John Shannon with great stories from interesting people in the state of Maine. And another person who tells great stories about interesting people in the state of Maine is Lori-Suzanne Dell, author of the book Stories from Maine, which I can see behind you. Clever product placement. Don't worry. We'll put a link in the comments for you, Lori. And also, I found you through an amazing Facebook page about stories from Maine. So let's talk about it. How did you get into, where did you find all of the questions that I could possibly ask? Like, where do you find all the detail for these stories, Lori?
Well, I'm a historian. So coming up with information is just what I do. Research is what I love to do, and I will sit here at my desk 12 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, because I'm like most historians. I have no life. So I just sit here and research and research and research and read. I don't read any of today's newspapers, so the Portland Press Herald does not come to my door. The Lewiston Sun Journal does not come to my door. But I do read the Daily Eastern Argus and many of the old newspapers from the 1700s and the 1800s. And so I basically sit here and read those each day, every day, and you'd be amazed the stories that you come up with.
You've come up with some great stories. Well, here's the cover of your first book. Stories from Maine 2 is out now. But if anyone's looking, I know perhaps on Amazon you can find this one or the next one. I'm sure lots of area bookshops like Sherman's or something carry your books. Is that correct?
I'm not really sure who's carrying them. I don't get a list that tells me who has them. So I wish I did, but nobody provides me with that list.
Well, it's too bad. It's information that'd be handy to have. I want to jump into one of the most fascinating stories on your YouTube, because you have your own YouTube podcast and the Facebook page as well as the books. But this one, something that I can't believe kids are not taught in school. Let's look at this.
Now for a direct report on the scene, here's W.W. Chaplin at station WCSH, Portland, Maine.
This is the fourth week of the Indian summer drought. I flew to Portland by Northeast Airlines today, low over the Kennebunk region, where the greatest damage has been done.
We are flying at approximately 1,000 feet up in the air, directly over the great fire area in Maine. A moment ago, we looked ahead and saw a high purple wall of smoke that looked as if we couldn't possibly break through. But then we penetrated that, and now we're in the fire area itself. The ground is half hidden. You can see great columns of smoke rising through the general pall that covers this whole part of the country.
Forest fires whipped by 40-mile winds.
Great newsreel footage and audio from the radio broadcast, I'm assuming. But the Great Fire of 1947 in Maine isn't something that anyone I've ever talked to knows about.
Well, it's,
Why?
there are a lot of people who do know, and mostly it's Mainers whose fathers or grandfathers were alive and fought those fires, because when those fires took place, basically every man, woman, and child in the state of Maine went on alert in one way or another. Many of the women went to schools and went to the hospitals to help in one way or another, either with clothing or food or medical supplies or just as evacuees. And many of the men became overnight firefighters, rushing out to the scenes to help in any way that they could, because the entire state of Maine and much of New England was ablaze.
Half a dozen directions.
One more clip, and then I want to talk about what you were talking about.
They've ridden a windstorm within 5 miles of the city limits. I have just come back from a tour of the closest fire front. The outlook is bad. Toward Biddeford Pool, the flames are solid. I watched the pine woods go at Waterboro. East Brownfield is destroyed. South Portland is in emergency status.
10,000 acres, it's estimated, have already been burned over. The fire is still going on, controlled in most places, but the fire still burns.
Said thousands of people in your podcast, thousands of people left homeless. But one of the good things was the rise of volunteer firefighters and fire departments in the state.
Well, and that's one of the things that always comes out of a catastrophe is change. So one of the things that the state of Maine realized at the time was, first, we don't have enough firefighters. We need more firefighters. We need more fire departments. We need more laws to help us keep this from ever happening again. So not having any sort of recycling of the woods, of going in there and doing preservation, not doing land management, not doing wildfire prevention, was something that was going on at the time. Nothing was being done. So they started to do that, making sure that there were more firefighters, that there were more fire ponds, that there was more equipment out there to do such. Firefighting became the number one priority here in all of New England, but most especially here in Maine.
1947, that fire that devastated how much of the state would you say? Was it more coastal, inland?
It was widespread. It was everywhere from it was spotty because it really went from Kittery to Aroostook, and from far down east all the way to the western border. It really broke out literally all over the state, which is why it's called the Great Fire of 1947, and they refer to it as the year Maine burned.
Wow. Lori-Suzanne Dell is the Maine People podcast guest with Stories from Maine. It's a book, it's a YouTube podcast, it's a Facebook page. She's a historian, an author, and a filmmaker, and great stories. Another one that many people may not be familiar with is the sinking of the German U-boat off the coast of Maine here in the latter days of World War II. We'll go with the first clip of that, and then I'll have you tell the story, if you don't mind.
Sure.
John Breeze testified at the Court of Inquiry subsequent to the events that he saw a submarine broach to the surface, as did 7 other survivors that day. That testimony was completely set aside by the convening authority, and they came to a completely inconsistent finding of a boiler explosion.
The USS Eagle and her crew were denied just credit. The survivors would have to accept blame for the boiler explosion.
I knew it was not a boiler explosion. They didn't accept that. And they decided, I think it was already prejudged what it was going to be.
The families of the dead would have to wait for justice.
So my short version of the story is German U-boat sinks a U.S. ship off the coast of Maine. Government doesn't want anyone to know.
Well, yes and no. The reason, first of all, it happens closer than just off the coast of Maine. It's less than 5 miles off the coast of Cape Elizabeth that this boat goes down, and this boat was protecting Portland Harbor throughout the war. So these men were living in Portland and in South Portland when this happened. So these were our guys throughout the war. And when this happened, and it happens April 23rd, 1945, it's basically 2 weeks before the surrender of Germany and the end of the war. The convening authority, which is the Portland Board of Naval Inquiry, are keeping this under their hat because they don't want the people of Maine or New England to know that a German U-boat could get this close to our American shores, especially in these last days of the war, because everybody knows that Germany is just about to surrender and it's all coming to an end. But wait a minute, these guys could still get this close to us. So our fishermen who are going out to fish, they're not safe. We're going out in boats to water ski, we're not safe. So nobody's safe. So they're making sure that nobody, realizes that the Germans can still get that close. That's number one. But number two, they just did not want to admit that this naval ship, was destroyed by the enemy. And they never, at the end of the way, they waited, by the way, until Hitler was dead and until Germany had surrendered before the story of the sinking of the Eagle was even released to the newspapers. So it was after the war was over. It was 3 weeks later before it came out and was released to the Portland Press Herald. So the story finally came out, and everybody by that point just went, okay, and walked away. And nobody bothered to go back and correct the record until this attorney started to look into this in about 1998.
Wow, it took that long for the truth to come out for everyone to know.
It took that long. It was a terrible miscarriage of justice for these men, and so many of them, lived out their life not receiving the credit that they were due, and the families who lost their loved ones right here off the shores of Maine
And
never
to
got
put it
to
in
know the truth
perspective,
of it.
at the time, Cape Elizabeth, Fort Williams would have been an active base, and the stretch of South Portland along the water from Bug Light practically up to Casco Bay Bridge would have been building Navy destroyers, etc.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Which is another reason why they didn't want people to know, yes, you guys could build this boat today, and as it's going out on sea trials, it gets sunk right outside the gates, basically the gates to Portland Harbor. So, I mean, they don't want people to know this, and our guys are blamed for this basically for the rest of their lives until this attorney, Paul Lawton, who's a great guy. I loved working with him on this video and this story. And then talking with the divers who went out in 2018 and finally located the Eagle 56. And they dove down. They were constantly coming up to South Portland, spending time up here and going out. And they made dozens of dives until they finally found it in 2018. And when they found it, the ship is in two sections, and they did find the boilers. And the boilers are intact. They did not explode. They were, according to the divers, they said that these boilers look like you could pick them up, put them back in the ship, and go right back about business again. So, it's absolutely proven that did not happen. It was not a boiler explosion. That boat was torpedoed by the U-853.
Amazing. Another great story from Maine. We're going to talk about the Cassius Clay, Sonny Liston fight, that Phantom Punch in a second. This is the coffee that we're drinking, and if you want to get it yourself, you can get 15% off your first order using the promo code BELLA at chubbydogcoffee.com. You can make yourself an order every month. Choose what coffee you like, have it delivered right to your house. It is absolutely delicious. These are the two that we've got here at the house right now. The French Roast, dark roasted, smoky, bold, and richly sweet. And the Order 66 dark Uganda coffee with rustic and bold and subtle fruit notes. You can get this yourself, a great sponsor, and help keep this podcast going. Use the promo code BELLA at chubbydogcoffee.com, or you can get the link in the comments. And some more questions and stories from Maine coming up.
The way my dad brought me up was always to work hard and to treat people well.
You ready to go for a ride?
We try to keep our goal to make people feel comfortable buying their cars and feel comfortable with the people they're working with.
Nice. Oh, it looks good over here.
So become part of our family. We really mean that. Without question, we're in this together.
We're going to take care of you and treat you like your family anyways.
This looks awesome.
Yankee Ford has so many people willing to help and make this tough time a little bit easier.
Radio207.com only plays original country music from Maine singers, songwriters, and bands. Streaming online and on your smart speaker. Radio207.com is on the air now. Radio207.com. Only Maine, only country music. Your next online event can be perfect thanks to virtualproductionsgroup.com. The Maine People podcast couldn't happen without them, and they can make your remote streaming event absolutely technically perfect. High quality live and pre-recorded productions for corporate events, weddings, tournaments, charities, and more with virtualproductionsgroup.com. Welcome back to the Maine People podcast, talking to Stories from Maine author, filmmaker, historian, Lori-Suzanne Dell. If you want to check out her YouTube page for some amazing stories, and join the Facebook group too, which is how I discovered you. So thanks for being on. We'll have a link to Lori's books in the comments here. Let's jump to the next story. This is the fight and the Phantom Punch heard round the world. Sonny Liston and Cassius Clay. Where do you start with this story? People didn't want to pick up this fight, this rematch between Cassius Clay, later known as Muhammad Ali, and Sonny Liston. Even in Vegas, they didn't want it. It ends up in Lewiston, Maine.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. And I started off in Miami because this is really where it begins. Sonny Liston is the heavyweight champion of the world. He's known as the guy that nobody wants to fight. He's just a brutal, brutal fighter. And when he hit, George Foreman in later years was his sparring partner. And George Foreman gave interviews and said that Sonny Liston's jab, just his left jab alone, was enough to make him see stars. That's tremendous. So
that says a lot.
Anyway, he takes on Sonny Liston in Miami by the 6th round. Sonny Liston is done. He's got a problem with his shoulder. He loses the title to Cassius Clay. So Sonny Liston wants a rematch. Muhammad Ali gives him the rematch. It's scheduled for Boston, but all of a sudden there's all sorts of rumors going on that the mob's involved on this, and there's a fix that's possibly scheduled to take place, and then there's something going on with this guy Cassius Clay. We're not sure. It's got to do with Muslims, and there's something going on with Liston and gamblers, and there's all kinds of stuff. And then all of a sudden, Muhammad Ali has a hernia and has to go into the hospital for an operation. And that gave everybody the opportunity to say, okay, stop. The fight stops. Stop it. Let's get him the heck out of Boston. We don't want him here. And they end up going to court, and there's a court battle to stop the fight from being rescheduled. There is a tentative date of May 25th, 1965, which is scheduled, but it's not going to happen in Boston. They finally get through everything. They start calling around, all the promoters are calling around saying, well, we got to find another venue for this. This ought to be great. Don't worry, we'll get it at Madison Square Garden. Madison Square Garden says, no, you won't. Nobody anywhere wanted to hold this fight. So one of the guys for the promotions, the TV promotion, calls up and talks to one of the guys in Lewiston and says, you got a place? Do you think you could put this on? He goes, oh, hell yeah. Bring it on. Bring it on. Come on, we could do this. We're Mainers. We can do anything. The guy says, you've only got 2 weeks to put on a heavyweight championship fight. He says, don't worry about it. We got this. And the guy's like, all right. So they brought it to Lewiston. And the guys in Lewiston start searching, where are we going to hold it? And the only place that they had to put it was in the Central Maine Civic Center, or the Central Maine Youth Center, which was a hockey rink at the time for high school.
And that was the Androscoggin Bank Coliseum now.
Yes, it is.
I'm gonna pick up your story from your podcast now with this video that takes the next segment of the story and to the actual fight.
They had to call a rematch off because Ali had a hernia. No cities seemed to want this bout this side of Hibernia. They tried to do it in Boston, but their efforts were in vain. In desperation, they went with a hockey rink in Maine. Tell me where they fought that night.
The city of Lewiston.
Who did Muhammad Ali fight?
It was Sonny Liston.
Okay, so there's the song that you had commissioned for your story. Pretty great.
Well, I didn't have it commissioned for the story. Actually, the Sandy River Ramblers had already recorded it. And I was doing this, getting ready to make this video, and I was researching, and all of a sudden up came this song, Down Went Sonny Liston. And I said, wow, what is this? And I listened to it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is fantastic. I like this song. This is perfect. And I contacted them and said, hey, could I use this song in the video? And they were like, yeah, sure. And then they ended up, making another song, an original song for the Eagle 56 video later. And this is Stanley Keach and the Sandy River Ramblers. Fantastic Maine group. A fantastic
Well, since you have
song
permission to Since you have permission to use their songs, I guess then I have permission to use their songs while I'm talking to you.
Let's
look at the fight
very
clip.
Happy that you're mentioning it.
I hope so. Here's a clip from the fight that's in your podcast.
ABC clock, 1 minute 53 seconds was 10 seconds after Liston hit the canvas.
There's that photo and that famous cover of Life magazine.
Yeah. Most iconic photo in sports history was taken in Lewiston, Maine, May 25th, 1965. You know, it's the beauty of Maine, and a lot of Maine history is how many firsts take place in the state of Maine. It comes up constantly, over and over and over throughout the history of Maine. And in this fight, it's not the first time a heavyweight championship has been fought in Maine, but it was the first time that Muhammad Ali ever fought under the name Muhammad Ali. And it was the first time that he ever defended his title.
But even on the cover of Life magazine, they used his old name, Cassius Clay.
They did. Well, there was a lot of people who were just not happy that he changed his name, and even during the interviews, they were constantly. 1 minute they'd call him Cassius Clay, and then he'd correct them, and they'd go, "Okay, Muhammad, whatever. Let's just get on with this." And they were not very patient with it. But in time, I think that he won them over. 3-time heavyweight champion of the world. Yeah, right? I think he won them over. And there was some great stories, actually, that came out of that night, because there were people who walked in to sit down, and there was one story of a man who, I didn't put this in the video or in the book, but it's just a little piece of extra added information. This one guy, he took out his wallet. This fight had just started, and he looked over, and he called to a guy to get a beer. And he handed the money over, and the guy handed back the change, and then he got over the beer, and he held the beer, and he dropped his wallet. He leaned over and finally got it, picked it up, put it back in his pocket, looked up, and they were going 1, 2, 3, and it was over, and he was like, well, he didn't even get a sip of his beer. The fight was already over.
I'm sure a lot of people missed it because it happened so fast.
It did.
Even the timing was contested.
Frank Sinatra was there. Robert Goulet was there. They say that Elizabeth Taylor was there with Frank Sinatra. I couldn't find evidence or proof of it, but they say that she was. Every heavyweight champion, I show it in the video, that was still alive at that point, I believe, were there. It was an amazing night of dignitaries who were there. And the referee is Jersey Joe Walcott, himself a former heavyweight champion, who completely screwed up the entire match, and then the Maine Boxing Commission screwed it up. They called the fight at 1 minute, and it wasn't. I mean, the fight was still going, which is why I superimposed my own clock over the ABC clock to re-show. Yes, this went 1 minute and 58 seconds before it was over. And, they were talking at the end, did this really happen? Did he really actually hit him? And when you slow that video down and you clear it up and look, you see it was an overhand right that came in. But a lot of guys wonder, was it really hard enough to take him out, or did he really throw the fight? And we'll never know.
Nope, we'll never know. But it's another great story for Maine. I've got to thank you. Thank you, first of all, for so much research and so much time and effort for some really full-bodied stories in your books and on your YouTube channel. They're just fantastic, Lori. Really great stuff.
Well, I'm glad you like them, and I hope that everybody out there tunes in, follows the channel, and just keep watching, because there's more out there.
I love it. There'll be links to the book and the Stories from Maine 1 and Stories from Maine 2 in the comments and on the YouTube channel, and also with the show info. And you'll also find links to Lori's page so you can follow her there. Appreciate it. Thanks for being part of the Maine People Podcast, Lori.
Great, John. Thank you.
The Maine People Podcast, available everywhere. Click subscribe so you never miss an episode.